And I have a background in competitive powerlifting. And my goal with this series that I'm hoping to put together is to share some of my knowledge to you all from my 9 years of competition and competing at national and international level events. So today we're going to start with one of the basics, being bracing in the squat, bench, and deadlift. And bracing is one of those things that gets overlooked very often from new lifters all the way up into advanced lifters. And for some people, you can make a quick technique change and it can add pounds to your squat and deadlift and help prevent some injuries moving into the future. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So before we get started, we just need to cover what is the goal of bracing. And in order to think about that, you have to think about the mechanics of your body system as you're trying to lift these weights, right? So in a squat and a deadlift especially, both of those lifts are going to load your spine, and one of your hinges or fulcrums to where your body is going to bend will be your hips, right? So if you are loading the lever arm that is your torso, one of the easiest places you can lose power or open yourself up to injury is to take this lever arm and bend it, right? Especially throughout the lift. So you've probably heard people say, keep your back straight, keep your chest up. All of those are going to be cues that are trying to help you remember to keep this lever straight. And by keeping this straight, you can have your best power transfer moving forward. Now that we've established that, we have to think about what is going to be the most stable type of lever in a system. And the best way to compare it is if I was trying to hold up a very heavy weight, right, and build a tower, would I be better off to use a flagpole or to build a giant pillar out of marble? And that's a pretty obvious example where most people say, oh, duh, the marble. But you have to think of your body the same way when you're loading your back with these weights, right? So you see it oftentimes, and this seems to be, just a societal thing. We have a tendency to breathe into our chest, right? If you ask someone to breathe in, or if I were to ask you to breathe in right now, there's a decent probability where you would breathe in, and immediately we would see your shoulders and chest rise, and your stomach would go in. And if you think about the anatomy of the system here, that doesn't make sense because your diaphragm needs to come down to make room for your lungs to take air in. And why I say this is a societal thing is, we're trying to look skinny constantly. So there's this pressure to hold in your stomach, breathe into your chest, and we get this chest breathing. And that moves over into the gym, right? So people automatically think, to brace, I need to take a big breath, and they'll breathe into their chest and squeeze this way. And notice doing that, my stomach went in, and let's go back to that pillar analogy, right? I am getting thinner, which makes my pillar less stable. And not only am I doing that, but I'm also lengthening this lever arm. So if you have any background in physics, we will know that the longer the lever arm, that's going to increase the torque on the fulcrum, which we established was the hips, to lift. So you're going to be less efficient because you're both lengthening yourself and you're making this pillar thinner so it's easier to compress and bend. So let's go ahead and move from that common misconception of how to brace and how we breathe to a proper way, and I'll take us into how I prefer to cue myself to brace properly. All right, so now that we've gone over, you know, common breathing, let's move into, hey, what's the proper way we need to breathe and how can we prepare ourselves to lift these weights? So, as I had mentioned, a proper breath should allow your diaphragm down to move down and allow that oxygen to come into your lungs and clear space. So truly, whenever you breathe in, it should all go into your stomach until all of that space is cleared, and then your shoulders may rise, right? So you're, if I'm taking a breath, I would go, right? Stomach came out, and then at the very tail end, my shoulders might start to rise as I run out of space. Now, moving into the idea of bracing, our entire goal is to create pressure throughout this system while increasing the diameter of our pillar, right? So, in order to do that, we want to push everything down and tighten through our core. And the best cue that I've heard to do this, and I cannot remember for the life of me where I picked it up. It may have been Juggernaut Training Systems and like Chad Wesley Smith, but don't quote me on that. But I prefer to breathe through my teeth. So if you take a moment, and you're going to look silly, but breathe out through your teeth until you run out of breath. So, like so, right? If you run out of breath, you will start to feel your abdominal muscles tightening as you're running out of breath there. And it will push down. It's just a natural response through your teeth. Now, that's a good cue to get everything tightened up in through here. Now, once you are out of breath and you've been tightened up through your core, what we want to do is now fill that core with an intra-abdominal pressure, otherwise known as a brace, right? So I have all of that pressure built into my abs, and now I'm going to take a breath in, being cognizant to push that breath into my stomach and not my shoulders. So, right? And as soon as I get that breath, I'm going to lock it in with what's called a Valsalva maneuver, and I'm going to press my tongue against the roof of my mouth. So, and once I'm there, I am fully braced, right? I have created as much tension as possible throughout my core, and I lock it in with my tongue, and you are ready to lift. Now, it is a common misconception that it is bad not to breathe while you're lifting. That's not necessarily true. We want to have that brace locked in throughout the entirety of the motion. So if you need to take a second breath, it is to be between lifts, not within a lift, right, at the bottom. So you're going to take your brace, right? Make sure to push everything down, tighten up your core. Then breathe in, don't be shy, right? Expand that stomach and that lever arm. And hold your breath, at which point you will go through the motion of the lift, and then at the top of the lift, you can let that breath out and begin the process again, right? So if you watch me compete, I will go through this process of bracing and get my core tight as I'm under the bar to unrack a squat, and then I will walk it out and repeat that process to get that pressure in. And it all comes down to the physics of that lever arm and widening your core. The last thing I want to mention before we move on to the idea of a belt, and that'll be where we wrap it up for the day. But you can do this through your mouth or your nose. Some people find it easier to breathe into their stomach if they're breathing through their nose. Personally, I've got a little bit of a deviated septum and I'm a mouth breather. So it is what it is. I do my whole process through my mouth. But you could replicate the same thing, pushing out through your teeth, build that pressure, and then through your nose, and then you're locked in, right? Because the whole idea is to tighten your abdominal muscles all through here, and then breathe into those to create as much pressure as possible. So let's go ahead and move on and talk about how a belt can amplify this and really help your lifts. So we just got finished talking about how to brace without a belt, right? And the whole idea is you should be able to go through your bracing techniques with or without a belt. Now, this is a piece of equipment that should be able to amplify and really help your brace to keep this entire pillar that is your torso stable. So the first thing that we have to take a look at is, hey, what's the goal of the belt? The goal of the belt is to give your body something to press against, right? The belt is not to, cinch you so tight that it is the pillar in and of itself. That is not its job, right? It is a supplement to your abs and the rest of your core, your obliques, everything to help you lock in even more for a lift. So you see a lot of beginners, and I did the same thing, and it cost me some poundages on my lifts early, right? A lot of people want to cinch the belt really tight to start, right? As tight as possible. And at this point, I cannot get a full breath in, right? I can only breathe in so much, and it's somewhat uncomfortable. And if we go back to those physics principles, right, my belt is artificially compressing the diameter of the pillar at which we're going to either squat or deadlift on. So if I over tighten, not only am I cinched off, but I can't get a full breath. I'm going to cost myself poundages, whether risking passing out or having discomfort as I'm cinched around my belt. So the first mistake that I see is over tightening the belt. Now, with that said, you want it relatively tight. Okay, and I am one of those people. I will use my belt from the beginning of my warm-ups because there's plenty of research that suggests and supports, in my experience, that using the belt does not take away from your core activation. And if anything, it's going to increase that activation for your lifting and your strength in general. Plus, I subscribe to the idea that if I'm competing in a belt, I should wear it. With that said, for a lot of my sets, I will wear the belt loose, right? That way I'm just learning, hey, where do I need to breathe into this thing? What is comfortable? And how can I utilize it? That way, as we get into heavier loads, you can tighten it up more and find that comfortable spot for a brace. Now, you may be asking at this point, okay, I have my belt. I have found a comfortable tightness for me. How am I going to brace with a belt versus without a belt? And the answer is actually quite simple. You should treat it exactly the same, right? So with my belt on, I am going to go through the same exact process for a squat or a deadlift to get myself prepared to lift. And hopefully this apparatus will just reinforce that brace. So I do the same thing where I breathe through my teeth until I run out of breath. That pushes all of the pressure down into my stomach and engages my core. And once I'm out of breath and everything feels like it's compressed down, that's where I take my breath into my stomach and do that Valsalva maneuver into the roof of my mouth. So push, and then I am ready to either unrack the bar or commence the lift. So that's it. Hopefully that answered some questions as far as how I prefer to brace and how I approach bracing for the powerlifting movements, specifically the squat and the deadlift. If you all have any questions, please leave a comment down below and I'll be sure to answer those. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Thanks for your time.